So our evolutionary behaviors have been hijacked.
Yes.
Can we use the same tools of marketing that have persuaded millions of people to buy things they don't need, which make them physically and mentally unhealthy and trash the planet? Can we shift those tools into driving behavior change for good?
Greetings. Welcome to the Advocate for Change, a platform for sharing, supporting, and advancing efforts towards achieving sustainability. My name is Tony Redman, and I'll be your host today. Joining me today will be Dr. Phoebe Barnard, and we will be discussing how to get people to embrace this idea of sustainability. Phoebe is an accomplished global change scientist and a professor of conservation biology and environmental futures at the University of Washington. She has over 180 publications on environment and climate threats. She also co-founded and led the Stable Planet Alliance, and she has collaborated on several global initiatives addressing sustainability. Welcome, Phoebe.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's always fun to talk with you.
Thanks for joining me. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. I'd like to begin by thanking you and all your scientist colleagues for the wonderful work you're doing and what you've done. I think over the years, we have been provided an abundance of data, reports, warnings from the scientific community, and we are living to the physical evidence and experience of what you've been warning us about. Continue the good work, and thank you. I'd like to begin our discussion with a quote from a piece of your work called Earth at the Crossroads. Our species, despite its cleverness, is proving grimly resistant to wisdom. The rise and fall of our civilizations over millennia give us much to learn from. The question is, do we learn and will we learn? You go on to say, we can and must hold explicit, open, honest, society-wide dialogues, both formal and informal, on the purpose and values of a new economy, society, and politics. This is a powerful paragraph with three messages implied. One is that we're resistant to wisdom, which means we're doing some kind of nonsense. The second is that we have much yet to learn. And the third is that the solutions to our problems include open and honest dialogue and the change of systems. I would like you to expand on these ideas and share with us what you see as the core reasons for our resistance to wisdom and why we need to change.
Thank you so much. You know, sometimes I write things and then promptly forget that I've written them. So it's nice to be reminded. Grimly resistant, yeah, particularly in the USA at the moment. And we're recording this at the end of June 2024, where we've just had a US election debate. It does seem as though we're grimly resistant to wisdom. But I do think that we all need to be aware that humanity is at a crossroads and that we are single-handedly responsible for the state of climate change, of biodiversity loss, of plastics pollution, of social, ill-being, unemployment, social service delivery, road rage, all kinds of social ills, planetary ills that are all boiling down to a root cause within our own psyches and our own systems.
In looking at the problem from a change management perspective, I arrived at the very same conclusions on the root causes of our sustainability issues, our mindset and our systems. So the solutions lie in transforming the leadership paradigm and mindset and our operating global systems. The systems problem is a much easier fix than the mindset issue. This quote from Claire Farrell sums up the reality of our systems issue. We have an economic system that's set up to engage in perpetual growth on a finite planet. alongside a political system that is short-termist by design. So you have an intersection of multiple systems that are incompatible with solving our problems. This statement is now irrefutable as we are living through the outcomes of these flawed systems. Phoebe, we have demonstrated the ability to do incredible things in the areas of science and technology. We are able to leave the boundaries of our planet for over half a century now. We have the knowledge and ability to transform to a sustainable global society. Yet we don't have the good judgment to preserve our planet, our resources, and our species. We just don't seem to be able to come to grips with our reality. From your perspective as a scientist, why is there such a gap between our intelligence and our choices?
There is a huge gap, right? And I think you, in your leadership work and coaching work and your organizational strategy work, understand this across the board of human society in an interestingly different way, perhaps, but very similar to the way I understand it coming from science and policy and communications. There's a big gap, obviously, between cleverness and wisdom. And I think it's rooted in our mindset of how we see ourselves in the world and how we see our relationship with nature and each other. You know, for the last 2 to 3 centuries, we've been developing the Industrial Revolution. There's been the arc of dominance by the global North and what we might loosely call Western civilization. And that arc of dominance is based on power asymmetries. It's based on the idea of, if I can put it a little bit boldly for most people, the idea of human supremacy, which is
Yes.
much different from any other kind of supremacy. It's just as potentially toxic and potentially self-deluding as any other kind. But
Right.
as human supremacists, I think people have been guilty of seeing ourselves in the universe at the top of the pile, the pinnacle
Yes.
of creation, the pinnacle of evolution, maybe. And that has allowed us to separate ourselves from nature. It's also allowed us to feel entitled to the kinds of benefits that we try to drag from each other and from the earth. So it's led to horrific inequalities, especially in the last 50 years. But
Right.
it's a long process of increasing inequality and increasing power asymmetries. So I think the gap lies somewhere deep in here in our brains, and we have to call it out. We have to talk about it because our evolutionary behavior has led us to a point where we can either encourage cultural values based on collaboration and caretaking and being of service and stewardship for the earth, or we can do what we have done, sadly, in Western society, encourage individualism and competition and aggression and profiteering and dominance and everything that goes with that, from racism to hyper-consumerism to planetary and climate scale degradation.
One of the ideologies that is killing us is the whole America First ideology. And it's not just America, it's America first or China first or Russia first. The idea that we are these nationalist and tribal ideologies that keep us in constant competition and conflict will prevent us from being able to work together on issues like sustainability, which is a global problem which requires global collaboration. And we clearly don't have the leadership paradigm for global collaboration. We've demonstrated that over the last, 60, 70 years, where we've known about this problem. I want to share with you this quote from Jeffrey Sachs of the SDSM. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He expresses the depth of our problem by saying, we are still in the early stages of trying to make a global civilization that is truly civilized. And this is our greatest challenge right now. We have powerful technologies that could end poverty if we use them properly in this mixed economy with a global moral agenda. If we don't do it, we can end up destroying ourselves. This quote reiterates 2 points that you've already expressed. One is, we're not truly civilized from a global perspective. And two, that the core reasons for this and all our social ills is our morality problem. We're unable to use our knowledge and capabilities with a global moral agenda. The fact is that we've embraced and built our social systems around the worst of our values, and we're now paying the price for it. You're 100% correct in saying we must become comfortable having the difficult conversations around our values, principles, and morality, and how they impact our decisions, actions, and our communities. One alarming indicator of our collective understanding of this problem is the recent Global Progress Report on our Sustainable Development Goals, which reports that only 16% of our SDGs are on track. This is an absolutely alarming response. No child could go home to the parent that paid good money for their tuition and say, I scored 16% on my exam. This SDG report is an exam result with the future of our planet and species on the line, and we scored 16%, which appears to be quite acceptable to our global leaders. This is a reflection of our collective commitment, understanding of the urgency on this matter.
I love the way you said that. And you've got a great mastery of metaphor and example. I enjoyed that, Tony. We are in a situation where we have allowed our society to develop with certain values that are really not smart or wise values. And I can understand the mindset in which a mindset of competition, bringing out the best for people might have developed. But most ancient cultures that are still functioning today have not had mindsets of competition. So, excuse me, all of the things that you've mentioned with the SDGs, with the way that we have developed our economies, I think are a result of a couple of things. One, we're looking at lots of symptoms and trying to address, and this is the case with the SDGs, trying to address each one in a siloed fashion. And I know the UN makes an effort not to have them completely siloed, that there's a little bit of cross-cutting, but honestly, a failure to acknowledge root causes is a fundamental problem of our society and the way we're trying to deal with the concept of development goals. The Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, there will be, if society is still functioning well, another iteration of development goals. And yet we are looking at the symptoms and not the root cause. We have an opportunity here with Antonio Guterres being the leader of the UN. He's bold, he's outspoken, he sees the problem for what it is. And I would love to have lunch with him, along with Jeffrey Sachs for good measure.
Yes. Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if
I
we
would
could
love to join you in that lunch.
If either of us ever gets an invitation, please let's remember this conversation. But Antonio Guterres is hosting the Summit of the Future later this year at the UN, which really is an opportunity to reframe not only how the UN thinks and operates about things like the Sustainable Development Goals, but really how humanity should be thinking and operating as we move into a new civilization. So you mentioned that I was the co-founder of the Stable Planet Alliance. And yeah, my two co-founders and I started that global alliance in mid-2022. And I ran it for about 18 months until I needed to shift to focus on other things. But one of my tasks during that was to write a white paper that was attempting to analyze the problem of dealing with and reframing the Sustainable Development Goals for the Summit of the Future. I wasn't able to finish that in the end, and it was profoundly frustrating, but I realized that other people are making similar points, and that the Secretary General himself has similar mindset and similar ideas. Our white paper was going to make three really basic points: that the root causes of our malaise, whether they are social goals like improving literacy and improving child survival and reducing maternal mortality, or environmental ones, they're all rooted in our what I regard as three quite fundamental root causes: our numbers, i.e. our population globally, our appetites, in other words, our consumption or hyperconsumption in the world, and especially that of the affluent global north, and our mindsets of entitlement and human supremacy and a failure to look after this spaceship Earth that is our survival system, and without which we cannot have an economy, we cannot have profit, we cannot have shareholders or any of that. And so I think having global discussions at societal level, at faith community levels, at household levels, between all of us on being more aware of our mindsets and the problems that are driving ecological overshoot and social stress, social ills. We need to consider those root causes and really think about our position here at this crossroads of humanity.
I'm glad that you brought up the importance of the United Nations. I'm of the opinion that the United Nations is the most important institution on the planet right now. And I find it absurd that their decisions can be vetoed, undermined, or ignored by any country or superpower, given what is at stake. If we're going to survive, we have to engage in a global systems transformation initiative like nothing we've ever done before. It's going to involve hundreds of thousands of transformation, mitigation, restoration, and adaptation projects that can only be coordinated through an institution like the UN. I also think that our survival hinges on our ability to achieve SDG number 16, which calls for peace, justice, and strong institutions. Only through strong institutions of integrity and purpose, led by people of integrity and purpose, can we lead, enforce, and maintain the systemic changes we have to make. Until we have these institutions that are empowered to deliver the social contract, that are empowered to work for the people, given the authority to actually do the work, we're just wasting time. So my passion and my area of focus is on building moral or conscientious leadership.
I wanted to ask you, why is it that we have had corruption endemic in many of our human societies, perhaps not all, for centuries, and we haven't figured out how to get rid of it? It seems to me there are psychological reasons and there are systemic reasons, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about why we haven't been able to get to it. I mean, is it seriously just a simple matter of the people that need to change the systems are in charge of the systems, benefit from the systems, have no wish fundamentally to reform those systems, like any government failing to change their own leadership term limits, for example?
Right.
Or is it
Yes.
something more insidious. And I'd love to hear what you think of that. And then I want to ask you something else.
Well, that is the question of the century, isn't it? Why is corruption and exploitation so endemic in our leadership systems? At the heart of it, I think we're talking about the concept of good and evil. It's in our inability to do the right thing. I believe that the reason corruption is so rampant throughout our systems is that we have actually adopted and woven into our cultures and systems 5 very destructive ideologies. In my book, Crisis to Consciousness, I call them the 5 poison paradigms. The first one is that life is a competition for the accumulation of wealth, or the greed principle. This mindset promotes the idea that life is a relentless race to accumulate wealth. It places monetary success above all else. It fosters a culture of cutthroat competition and ruthless exploitation. The second paradigm is that life is a competition for the acquisition of power. This paradigm fixates on the pursuit of power and dominance as the ultimate goal. It gives rise to environments where violence and control are valued, often leading to tyranny and oppression. The next poison paradigm is one of superiority and entitlement. This mindset is historically rooted in the idea of bloodline succession. It asserts that certain individuals or groups are entitled to rule or lead. It perpetuates systems of hierarchy and often sidelines competent leaders in favor of those who are born with privilege. The fourth destructive ideology is the fanatic mindset. What I believe is facts, or my God is God. This mindset also fosters supremacist ideas and views of entitlement based on the my God is superior or I am one of the chosen ones style. It is a closed-minded mentality that often leads to extremism and discrimination. And the last and very destructive mindset is what I call the might is right or bully principle. This principle is the ultimate example of the hypocrisy we display in our value systems. Violence is always dismissed as an acceptable conflict resolution approach in our homes. We don't tell our kids to go fight it out to determine who is right or wrong. We even have domestic abuse laws to deter bullying in the home. But on the global stage, it is totally acceptable for larger countries to bully smaller countries and take their resources. The adoption and integration of these destructive beliefs is the primary reason for our state of affairs. We can only get to a state of sustainability if we erase these beliefs from our leadership strategies and our systems and cultures. There are 3 things that can shield us from the negative effects of the poison paradigms. One is our grounding, the values and principles instilled in us by our parents and guardians. The second is the right kind of education. Education that encourages critical thinking as opposed to being programmed with the same destructive ideologies that got us here. And the third is a continuous journey of personal growth, a genuine desire to become a good person. The beliefs that we've embraced lead to corrupt and self-serving leaders. And what we need right now is servant leadership.
It's interesting that you speak about servant leadership, because I was just going to, the second part of my question was going to be, how do we instill a value of servant leadership, a value of service more broadly in a society that's become extremely alienated from itself and alienated from communities and the planet? I do think that there are other ways, and I've started thinking about this more and more in the last couple of years. I think I probably told you another time that my background was in behavioral ecology, evolutionary ecology. And so I was very interested when one of my colleagues in the Stable Planet Alliance advisory board, of which I was the CEO for a while, started pushing a little bit gently at me. He's a young New Zealand marketing executive and ran a number of businesses, Joseph Mertz. And he was convinced, knowing that I had worked a lot on a number of papers about warning humanity, world scientists' warning of a climate emergency, world scientists' warnings into action. I'd been part of a number of those. And so he said, I think you're still missing the fundamental root cause. We have a behavioral crisis, and it's been manipulated. Our evolutionary behavior has been manipulated by corporations and the marketing firms that represent them. And I said, yeah, maybe, let's talk about that. Eventually, he persuaded me that we did need to write something about this. And so we wrote a paper about our human behaviors and therefore the systems that we create with these behaviors, but how the marketing industry and these corporations had taken our evolutionary tendency to hoard resources to get through a tough winter in a cave or out, as humanity went through the last few 100,000 years, we needed to move across landscapes, survive harsh changes in weather conditions, navigate through ice, and so on. And so the ability to acquire and hoard resources was central not only to survival, but to being able to acquire a mate, have children, and so on. So almost everything led to the dominance and aggressive tendencies that you needed to hunt, that you needed to be able to observe the landscape and get enough to eat, and so on. But all of that now in the 21st century plays out in flat screen TVs and Maseratis and McDonald's and a million things that we don't need. So our evolutionary behaviors have been hijacked. Yes. Can we use the same tools of marketing that have persuaded millions of people to buy things they don't need, which make them physically and mentally unhealthy and trash the planet? Can we shift those tools into driving behavior change for good? Now, the interesting thing about that paper was that it was co-authored by 4 marketing executives, including one very prominent global marketing executive, Rory Sutherland, who is the vice chairman of Ogilvy Global. And most of these guys had become very disaffected by their own industry, just in the same way that a lot of people working for the fossil fuel industry started to say, what the hell am I doing here? And so we realized that we needed to start the conversation about what's in our own brains and how it affects the economies and the other systems that we have created.
And like how you put that, our evolutionary survival instincts have been hijacked by the marketing industry. And now you want to use the same marketing tools to promote sustainability principles. That is very interesting. I think the power of the marketing industry is evident, and I believe that we should use every tool at our disposal to promote positive change. So I'm all for it. I do have concerns on how effective it's going to be at the very highest levels of society. So
I do think it's a time, though, to call upon the power of people's own ego. And, plenty of people may say they have no ego, but they may want to leave a legacy.
yes.
The legacy of a leader is, did you do the right thing for the most good? Yes. The most people, the future of humanity. Surely that's the kind of thing that your average leader would want to say. They were on the right side of history with that one. But most people are still spinning in their conventional boxes, because we haven't really started that conversation broadly enough about this being the crossroads of humanity, that if we just continue spinning in those boxes, we'll spin off over the cliff. And if we wish to have a future if humanity wishes, I'm paraphrasing James Hansen and a bunch of the climate science colleagues, if humanity wishes to preserve a future with a civilization, then we need to have the conversations that start to drive a shift in thinking, because
Yes.
marketing tools and conversations and the opinions of trusted people we know are a lot faster than all the other things like traditional education. And those traditional measures are needed too. But right now we've gone on so long that they're not going to be enough in time on their own.
Yes, I can see how marketing can be an effective tool. If we choose to use it for a global moral agenda, it can be very effective because it has already proven to be a very powerful social influence tool. But my primary concern is the obvious conflict of interest at the decision-making tables. The same individuals who benefit from our current systems and beliefs control the marketing industry, and they have no real motivation to change. We are also witnessing a rise in popularity of extremist leaders that push divisive policies and tyranny. This is indicative of the diminishing altruistic values across our societies. Once again, we're resorting to our primal survival instincts when things get tough. We can't successfully navigate this journey with social relationships built on hate, greed, hostility, or fear. We need leaders who advance peace, collaboration, integrity, and equity as the cornerstones of our societies. And that leads me to our second critical challenge: time. It would take a minimum of 30 years through traditional education to achieve the kind of leadership and cultural change that we need. So perhaps using marketing tools can be more effective to accelerate our much needed mindset changes.
Well,
Look in the
there's a lot of
future.
people working on this actually already. And, probably
Great.
some of the people listening to this would be laughing and smirking because, it sounds like we're just trying to get people to buy ugly sackcloth clothing and sensible shoes. But it isn't about that. I think it's reconnecting with our hearts and what we feel that we love and what we've been missing. And so for me, helping people understand how to live in a better way, a more sustainable way, a more reconnected way, is helping them reconnect with their nostalgia and the things that they love that they may not have realized have been eroding away out of their lives. Things like relationships, things like nature or birdsong, things like collectively working on a project in a community that makes people feel satisfied. We all know that people are feeling increasingly alienated and empty, spiritually empty, emotionally empty by having a hyper-consumerist society. So helping people move away from that back into a realm of love, community, service, purpose, an understanding of importance for the self, not above other people, but as part of a community. I think those are important conversations to have, and they will help people adopt this kind of approach, I think.
Well, Phoebe, the social values you describe would definitely give rise to a sustainable utopian society if we were able to fully implement. We have to embark on the greatest transformation project ever undertaken. And although there are already thousands of people working diligently on this problem, our efforts amount to putting a band-aid on an amputated arm. We are bleeding out. Albert Einstein stated, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. This statement is extremely relevant to our situation because we have too many leaders operating from a level of consciousness far below their level of responsibility. For society to function effectively, our leaders must have a level of consciousness that is equivalent to their level of responsibility. And right now, we have too many individuals with national and global level responsibility operating from a self-serving or selfish level of consciousness. The truth is, the scope, scale, and urgency of these threats cannot be overstated, and it requires extensive global collaboration and planning for any measure of success. We must find a way to wake up our leaders and the public and find a way to make sustainability a way of life, not just another buzzword. Sustainability must become the number one strategic priority of every organization, industry, and governing body around the world. The mindset required to lead us to sustainability is described by Vandana Shiva in this statement. Oneness, she says, is the recognition that we are part of one planet and we are one humanity. And unless we live with that consciousness and shape every moment of our production and consumption with that consciousness, we are going to destroy ourselves.
It would be nice if we could wave a magic wand and make that happen. We know from other animals, other mammals, that the more and more pressure that there is on a system, the more and more people, the fewer and fewer resources or social services that there are, the more difficult that is to achieve. So I think the main question to put out there for people is, given everything that is at stake, everything that we know and love is at stake, which kind of person do you wish to be? A proactive, collaborative, compassionate person? A reactive, mean-spirited, violent person? Because we have to choose, not only for ourselves individually, but the society we wish to inhabit.
We certainly have some serious and difficult choices ahead. The global nature of our problem makes our collective choices far more important than our individual choices. And collective choices are usually determined by leadership. The operational solutions to our problem lies with effective systemic change. But for the strategic challenges, we're very dependent on the competency of our leadership. We have the intellectual and technological foundations to make the necessary changes. What we need is committed and conscientious leadership. We face these existential threats because our current socioeconomic systems and cultures are founded on the worst of our virtues: domination, manipulation, and exploitation. This is a formula for implosion. We must build global and organizational systems and cultures based on sustainable principles, such as peace, equity, and rationality. So from a change management perspective, I would say we have three giant steps to reach a state of sustainability: elevate, collaborate, and integrate. We must elevate our leadership consciousness and strengthen our ability to do the right thing by building institutions of integrity. These institutions can then lead us in collaborative efforts to establish an environment of global peace. Collectively, we can then develop better economic and governance systems and a feasible global sustainability plan. Then we can integrate the best of our knowledge and the best of our virtues into building a better world.
We need to drive big and bold and ambitious change and not wait for other people to hand that imperative to us. We are out of time. If we don't do this, it won't get done. We, you and I, and the thousands of other people driving in this direction. And one day soon, the existing political leaders and the existing social and faith leaders that are dragging their feet will have no option but to sit up and take notice and either get out of the way or be run over.
Well, Phoebe, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I deeply appreciate you spending your valuable time with us today. I think we've covered some very important information, but we are just scratching the surface on this topic. I'd be more than happy if you would join me again to continue on a later date. Right now, I'd like to give you the floor for any closing message or remarks you may have for our audience.
I think becoming aware of our moment in history and the choices it presents to us. Just having that conversation across society that helps people become aware of that crossroads. Everything else will follow if we understand that we still have agency over many things. There are some things that are already barreling away, like sea level rise, which on a human lifespan, we cannot realistically solve. But almost everything else, and indeed how we deal with sea level rise, like removing toxic infrastructure from the coast, etc. Many of those things we still have agency over, and we must act now.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. It has been a pleasure. And thank you all for listening. I hope you found this message beneficial. Please help us get this message out by sharing and subscribing. And visit us at advocateforchange.com for more information on our journey to sustainability. Our situation is dire and urgent, so we need everyone rowing this boat in the same direction. Get informed and get involved. Thank you very much.